Kari, we are super excited to have you on our podcast, Humans in the Healthcare Loop, and seeing you in the industry. You have really created a space for how one should lead, and you've created a space for how you mentor. Before we get into some of those, I think Dallas and I have always been keen to learn the beginnings, the origins. How did you get into this space of self-funded healthcare? What are some of those moments? If you can take us back to it, that would be super helpful.
First of all, Ramesh and Dallas, what a pleasure to spend some time with you this afternoon. You're two of my favorite people. So we could talk all day together, and thank you for having me on as a guest. So I was very fortunate with my career to have mentors from the very, very beginning of my career early on that guided me, helped me build the foundation. And I, like many people, Ramesh, in this industry, I was working my way through my undergraduate and graduate degrees, and I needed a job and fell into it. Also, like many, many people in the industry, I was fortunate to have mentors along the way that gave me opportunities I probably was not technically ready for at the time, but gave me the opportunity. One of my favorite sayings is, leap and the net will find you, right? You have to jump in. And I think the three of us all have parallel stories about that and have just been lucky enough to move up in the industry. And then most importantly, give that back. So from a leadership perspective, send that elevator back down to other men and women who are just starting the careers. And I have such a passion for that. I know you two do as well, but that's a little bit about my path. And I was fortunate along every step of the way. I also worked exceedingly hard and asked a lot of questions. And so I would tell our younger listeners, I can't overemphasize the importance of early career building and understand how businesses actually work, and taking unglamorous roles, or what some may consider an unglamorous role, to learn fundamentals and develop that reputation for reliability. All of that is what gets you noticed and helps you move up on the career path.
You know, it's interesting. I got to share a little bit of a story here because it jogged my memory. I was having a conversation with my dad, and it's interesting. Obviously, as you age, your relationship with your parents change. That's a good thing. We were having a conversation. He was actually a rare moment of praise for me, which was nice. And he made a comment that he's like, "You did the work." What he realized now is he wasn't willing to do the work, or to take on the duties that maybe are less glamorous, or what he either viewed as beneath. He didn't expand too deeply on it. When I was in the sports world, we had a conversation that the most important value was availability.
This is great, Dallas. Kari, I read somewhere that you were doing some basic job in some healthcare organization and somebody saw you. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, I would love to. So this is one of those moments that absolutely shaped my career. It changed my life. I literally just got goosebumps. It changed my life. I was working, my first job in the business was an account rep position at a company called Golden Rule Insurance that United later bought, but it was owned by the Rooney family. And I was 20 years old, again, working my way through college. All I knew was that was a job. I didn't know anything about the insurance industry. I didn't know what that meant. So I started the job, and I would stay late. And I've always been very intuitive and curious about how things fit together and work. I get that from my mom and grandma. And I asked questions. And so it wasn't even my immediate supervisor who was a director. It was the vice president of operations. I knew who she was, but I didn't really know her, who noticed this. And I didn't know she was noticing it. And so she came to my immediate boss and said, "Hey, listen, we have one more position open in our executive training class. I think Kari would be a great fit for that. Ask her if she'd like to participate." And I would laughingly tell the two of you as my good friends today, I had no idea what that meant. All I knew at the time was it was more per hour. And so I said, sure, having no clue what that really meant. But what it really meant was I was then being immersed into an executive round robin training program where Golden Rule, a handful of us, 12 of us in that class. And then we had the luxury and pleasure of spending 4 weeks at a time with all of the executive team leaders in different functional capacities, operations, legal, claims. And you did this round robin. And at every point you had to take exams and you were just immersed into that world with really no background. It completely changed my life. So imagine at age 20, here I am with the part that was in the legal area. I am drafting at age 20 Department of Insurance complaints for an insurance company, like out of nowhere. And so the gal that recommended me for that training class, her name was Mary Horner. And I want you to know that a couple of years ago, I tracked her down. She's still alive. And I found her. She's retired in Florida. And I reached out and wrote her this warm, glowing letter about, you changed my life. Awesome. And so that, again, that's why I have goosebumps telling the story. Because it did. That set me on a trajectory into leadership roles and operations in our business, probably really before I was ready. But that's what started my career.
It's amazing. I think it's great that you took the time to recognize that person, later on. I think it's real easy to think that, right? And have that and share with the people that matter. But we rarely take the time to share with the person that probably had that level of impact. So I think that's amazing that you took the time to do that. You probably can't measure the importance to her at that point as well.
It was very sweet, Dallas, because she immediately responded, and this warmed my heart again. I'm almost 60 years old, so I've not talked to her in probably 40 years. Do you know what she said? The first thing she said to me was, "Oh, I remember you." How cool is that?
That is awesome.
Yeah.
That is.
And so what lessons did you take from that, being picked and being given the opportunity? How have you kind of taken that into your leadership now?
Yeah, many, many lessons from that opportunity. So a lot of how you communicate, how the business works. The more that people underneath us, the more that people understand what we are facing daily and the intertwinings of the business, the better they perform for us. I personally enjoy that visibility and that interaction as well. And teaching fundamentals and then using cross-functional training to enlarge their vision, their capabilities. And you also then simultaneously are positively impacting succession planning without even putting that name on it. But there is just a foundation importance and clarity that comes from teaching people to learn to act with 70% clarity, right? And not being scared. And that's under my leadership style, that's what I've found helps us move to be competitive. More knowledge, clear action, knowing that, hey, we're not always going to always make the right decision, but here's what I like to teach. That's okay. Inaction is not okay. Making decisions is important. And then if you need to pivot or you need to slightly tweak, that's okay. And then teaching that, that's what we do every day to make companies successful. And I think for so long, there's been the stigma about what has to be perfect. No, it doesn't. Framing with your leadership team and people at all levels within the organization, we're here, we're visible, we're not perfect. And your input for us daily is so important to our overall success. It's just critical. Teaching those fundamentals, teaching people that, hey, you want to sit in our seat? You're going to have to do some unglamorous jobs.
Yeah, I think are major tenets of leadership, from communication kind of being the key to everything, and then empowerment of the team to ultimately deliver. One of the things I realized when I got into executive leadership and in C-suite roles was there's a natural silo that's created just with the title. And it was something I probably didn't give it enough credit in the early days of being in the role. But what I realized through that piece was bring that down. Like ultimately I had to bring that down, and it was done through communication and empowerment from my experiences, which was really, you're doing the jobs day to day. The companies we have the privilege to lead are very nuanced, and there's frankly subject matter expertise that's really important, and there's no way we could know everything. So we need that level of input, and we need to be able to relate to those folks to be able to make the decisions that we need to make. And frankly, we can't make all of them, and we need them to be able to do that. And it's amazing. The most rewarding part for me was seeing people once I say they got it, like, hey, like it finally clicked for them and they got it. And they're like, hey, I can speak respectfully, but I can speak and share my opinions, and I can make the decisions that in essence my role should make. And everything doesn't have to bubble up to the leadership team. Like once that culture kind of starts, it's really an amazing feeling within the organization.
I agree totally. I think, whether your path is through operations or sales or finance, or it doesn't matter. That common thread that we are speaking about together, it's adaptability, right? How you adapt, how you share information, and the depth and speed with which you're able to teach those skills are so important.
Which kind of really connects to this core values. Whatever the core values are for each organization, they become almost the principles to operate and behave under. I wasn't that familiar with it. Yes, everyone knows about core values, but about a year and a half ago in my own company, somebody mentored me who has grown a company from zero to $500 million. And he said, core values, Ramesh, are the foundation of how you hire, how you fire, but also how you reward people, and you show up yourself every day with those core values. Hopefully, those core values are what you put in place anyway in consultation with your team. And so you should be showing up with those core values. Then people know how to behave, and then they can make their own decisions. They can owning the outcome is one of the core values. And I continue to still struggle. How do you daily, weekly basis promote those core values? How do you ensure people understand them fully? And I don't know how you have used core values in your company.
Yeah, I think there has to be a relatability to the frontline folks. I believe that everything starts with those frontline folks and them understanding as much as we can give them on how the business works and the values that drive us as leaders of companies and how their input is so valuable to that. Those folks on the front line, that's not where problems just happen. That's where loyalty is won or lost from our internal employees, from our client. They make our businesses. And so as much information as we can give them, we should give them. The other thing is, I think all of us, as a result of COVID and just how the industry's changed, have modified our leadership styles to completely embrace more communication, more visibility, more sharing of that decision making. I think across the board, I've seen that, and that all feels really good.
Yeah, I think, couldn't agree more. I'll share a little story. So when I had the opportunity to step into the president role at Benefit Management, I had actually gone to the broker side for a cup of coffee. It was 5 months. I think I was there 3 months, and the board asked me to come back and lead the TPA, which was obviously I'd grown up in that TPA, so that it couldn't have been any better, right? Like I was like, of course I'm taking this job. They could have paid me nothing. I was going to give that thing a run, but I also knew I was able to get kind of buy-in from the board from a support perspective, not capital. They weren't giving that up, but you know how those conversations go. But I wanted support because we needed to make significant changes to the business for us to reach our goals and kind of meet the market. And when I stepped in, I realized a couple of things. One, people want to be led. So, Ramesh, when you're talking about your kind of pillars that you build off of the organization, people do want to be led, but you've got to explain to them where you're leading them and why you're leading them there. And so we spent a lot of time during that, myself, the leadership team, of really what I would call like pulling people in with regards to tying everything back to what we were trying to do. So we could, the high level vision, here's where we're going. Then everything we delivered or communicated tied back to that. So we were always kind of connecting back to the same thing. So folks began to understand that. And then we pushed hard for that culture of, it takes everybody. Your voice is important. We want you to hear it. And it was interesting. The younger folks adapted to that way faster. So they were more than happy to share. I realized some things through that. One, they wanted to be led and they were excited about something new. I don't think they knew where the outcome was going to be, but they were literally excited. And once you got them to kind of understand why, the why was really, really important. It seemed like things started heading the right direction.
Yeah, I think it's the analogy I give internally as well is, look, if my job as a leader is to kind of, if we are saying we are, in Los Angeles, we're flying out, we've got to tell where the destination is. We've got to define very, very clearly what that place is, where we are going, what does it look like, what does it smell like, what would it be like when we arrive there, so that people know we're going there. And then they'll figure out little kind of corrections along the way.
I think there's another piece. Commitment's really important. So like you can't be half in and half out on these type of things. I've also found that out too. Like it can't be off the side of the desk. It's like either you're committed to it and then you are fully committed to it like every day. And you've got to show up that way as the person has the opportunity, to lead others. But you've got to be committed if you want to expect your people to be committed.
I love that, Dallas. And I couldn't agree more. There's no room for wishy-washy. You have to be committed and communicate that daily and reinforce that. And I call that, there's an element of swagger that is so important in leadership now, right? And I want to be very clear for our audience. That's not I'm not talking arrogance. I'm talking about just confidence in your team. And this is the pillar, and this is where we're going, and this is how we collectively are going to get there. And I'm confident about it. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but setting that expectation at all levels in the organization that empower them to act and to reach the outcome. I think that's an incredibly important point that you raised.
And Ramesh, you remember when we first started working together, this is the early days of zAcademy. By the way, Kari, when I met Ramesh for the first time, I think it was at SIA in San Francisco, is when we first met in person. And we sat down, we spent 2 hours, and we were envisioning a member engagement. Like we had a lot of detailed conversations about member engagement. He didn't take a note for 2 hours. And I mean, Terry Ramundi and we dropped a lot on him, and literally he missed nothing. That was amazing. But we ended up co-developing some mobile technology together, which was super, super cool, really built on the zAcademy chassis. But back in those days, one of the things that we did, the swagger part, may be useful, ignorance, I don't know. But we basically said, hey, we're going to be the best TPA in America. We're going to tell everybody that. And like we put it on LinkedIn and such, right? And that's what we said internally. And that was the standard that we wanted to hold ourselves to. It wasn't as much as saying like, hey, we're better than XYZ TPA down the street. It really wasn't that. But it was more about like, this is how we're going to look at ourselves. And this is the standard we've got to show up to with every day. The interesting part about that, I did get a phone call from a couple TPAs, like a couple of CEOs of TPAs, like, hey, that is a really bold statement. Or I would go to a conference and folks would grab me and they're like, hey, I can't believe you said that. And I would explain it to them. And once I explained it to them, they got it. But it was like, they were not thrilled necessarily with that comment. And I was like, wow, you're very sensitive about this. Like that was more than I expected, but we'll work through it. The good news is both of those people that reached out to me, I have good relationships with. So no issues long term. But that was the swagger that we needed to enter with.
And I completely applaud that. And that's what I'm talking about. There's nothing arrogant about what you did or what you, like, I don't feel that you posted. It's exactly the opposite. It's the swagger. It's the building comms the team and them and saying to them, we've got this, right? So I think that's really cool.
And also it attracts the right customers as well. So I think as Dallas, I remember that posting it up and, the conference that you hosted in Florida with all the brokers, you announced that this is what we are and this is what we're going to do for you. And this is how we will actually serve you really, really well, the best in the market. It attracts then the right customers as well. They like that story. They like the fact that you're saying you're going to be the best in X.
I think we had like 10 to 12 benefit consultants, brokers that were there. Not all of them had business with us, but they were folks that we identified that we felt like aligned with us. And we got together in Tampa, and it was days. We're talking 2 or 3 days before COVID. So obviously we didn't know any of that was coming. It was early March of 2020, but literally days, which is crazy. But we got everybody together, and it was probably the best event that I've ever been to because it was super intimate, and we only allowed a couple key partners with us. It was a day and a half, and we really got true feedback, which I thought was vitally important for us kind of setting the remainder of our year and into the following year. It was really an amazing experience, and Ramesh was part of that.
Yeah, I love that. You've brought up another point too that I think our listeners will appreciate and may surprise folks, our inner circle. But this happens every day. And I was sharing this last week at SIA with the mentoring forum when we were mentoring young leaders. And it's so impressive to me within our industry. And that is, we may compete with each other on a daily basis, or we may be leading a different part of the ecosystem. But at the end of the day, this is universally what I've found, Dallas and Ramesh. I've found that we actually are all friends. And the wealth of sharing information still just makes me warm and fuzzy, right? You don't see that very often. And I was telling the mentees last week in New Orleans at the SIA Spring event, we switch tables every 30 minutes with about 120 folks and below 40. And you bring up that point, and I think that's so important that in addition to being leaders in the industry, just from a community standpoint, we share information, we take care of each other. And I think that's such an important part of our business.
I've had the privilege of being in this business 17, 18 years now. People have helped me from what very easily should be viewed as competitors throughout that entire process. I'll tell you how far we actually it was one of the things I shared with my leadership teams multiple times over the years was on a quarterly basis, I would talk to folks that were presidents and CEOs of other TPAs. So I just had a list of folks, and all we did, we would meet for 30 minutes once a quarter, and we would just, what are you seeing in the industry? What's causing a problem? What are you experiencing? All of those things, right? And it was totally a raw conversation. There was no prep work. I mean, it was literally, we just sat down and had these conversations, which was very cool.
So that kind of connecting your employees with other employees of other TPAs and in the industry allows you to serve the healthcare industry a lot better. Maybe, Kari, if you could talk a little bit more about how do you see the role of these frontline team, the humans who are really in this healthcare loop? How do you kind of keep them motivated? Because I'm sure they get shitted on as well at times.
Yeah.
They probably get frustrating patients, members. How do you keep them motivated, learning, excited, and focused on the mission?
Well, I think first of all is just acknowledging that frontline staff are actually the face of the brand. Every interaction with them is a moment of truth where a client's going to decide whether they're staying with us or not, right? It's actually their action, their resolution, that decision-making process. Everything happens there. So whether it's giving them that authority to make quicker decisions, giving them the visibility with us to understand that those metrics that they're achieving on that front line have financial ties to them for us for an organization, right? There are performance guarantees that tie into everything that your frontline staff do. And then that comes full circle to our partnerships. The other thing I think is so important, the overall retention that results from every interaction with our frontline teams. So if you solve problems for John Smith, Sally Smith on that front line, and you do that effectively with grace, sometimes with humor, depending, and you execute on all the follow-up items, I'll never lose a client for that. But if you perform operationally and execute at that frontline level with those tenets, no one's going to be calling me saying we're leaving your company. It's going to be exactly the opposite. And so we're vocal about that. We tie those two things together about their performance and their execution directly impacts my retention and directly impacts new sales. But the bigger thing is it directly impacts retention with current clients and their membership base. And the other thing is it impacts what I call, Ramesh and Dallas, lunchroom talk, both internally and externally. So internally, there's no bigger confidence builder than having lunch with someone who just said, hey, I had this call. This is the problem. We solved it. This is what we did. It goes to that swagger. And then externally with the member on the other end of that problem who talks to their fellow employees at the client level and saying, hey, Kari's company solved this. They were great. They solved my problem. They listened. They helped me with care navigation. Portal was amazing. All those type of things. That just continues on to help us with long-term retention and remove unnecessary barriers, and confidence builds confidence. So I am very passionate about visibility with our frontline and sharing success stories with our front lines because they are the face of our brand.
It's not easy to do. One, they're tough jobs. But I've always said, like, the toughest for any business is to turn a non-customer into a customer. After that, the next piece is whoever has to deal with the complaints, right? And we've got a number of places within our industry where folks are on the receiving line of those. That is tough to navigate day in and day out. But sharing the success stories, I think that's the easiest thing to do that very few people do. Like, they overlook the fact of, and the power of it. Like, you've defined kind of the power of that with regards to your team and the impact that makes on your team, as well as retention as a whole. Frankly, the attitude of the folks answering the phone matters so greatly. It's hard to believe. But I think, normal course of business, and you could probably say this about any business, you almost forget to celebrate some of the wins. That's almost the expected part. You spend so much of your day kind of troubleshooting the fire drills that end up happening, and people forget that the value of actually sharing that other side. And it's really not easy to do that. Your natural inclination is like, yeah, of course we're supposed to do that. let's solve this other problem that I got over here. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's not easy to do.
And I wonder if it's compounded, these kind of things, working with the team, the front line, getting them excited, to understand with all the technology that's kind of being thrown at them, or that could be, some of it could be helpful, some of it could be overwhelming. I don't know. How do you see helping your team with this onslaught of technology and innovation?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is explaining why it's valuable and demystifying it. And then also continually getting their feedback as to what it's like to use it day to day. So sitting in their seat, being in their skin, understanding, are the shortcuts working? How are those tools enabling us to better serve our members in different generations? Because they come at that very, very differently. Just the amount of time, too, just so with my operational hat on, even measuring the time while you're on a call to get from A to B within the system. Are we using AI to help that? I mean, all of those things that the three of us tackle every day. And, in her one-on-one with me, we actually have conversations about navigation for our nursing team. Is it running well? Can we improve? What else would you like to see? Because time is money. So the quicker they can help that member who is either ill or has been injured or has something going on in their life, the quicker that we can help them navigate the complex healthcare system, the better we all are. And so if we back up internally from that goal, how is our team navigating through that system? What does that look like? Are there things that we can change that make that process quicker and more easily navigated on a day-to-day basis? So we actually have in my organization those conversations. It's that important to me to understand that enabled shortcuts or comfort at movement within those tools is so very important.
Yeah, no, there's a range of things here for our listeners. Dallas, any kind of final that you want to pose to Kari and to really bring this home?
Yeah. What's the industry going to look like in 5 years? Put on your Nostradamus hat, and there's a lot of change. We've got a lot of point solutions. We've seen the transition to where brokers generally and benefit consultants now have more control over more pieces of the ecosystem. Where do you see kind of the future?
Yeah, Dels, I think it comes right back to what we've been talking about through the session. That's adaptability, because with the mergers and acquisitions going on, the pool of people in the industry is getting smaller and the demands are getting greater to put that ecosystem in place. The other thing that's very apparent to me, and I think this will continue over the next 5 years, is just the gap in knowledge. Because anytime you've got new players within the ecosystem taking more of the pie, if you will, trying to solve that bigger problem solely, the more complicated that is. And so succession planning is critical. Again, understanding, providing that ecosystem to clients, who is executing on what piece, and then how do those tie together? You almost have to separate and then bring back together the solution as a whole. And I think what we will see is the individuals and companies that execute on that best will survive. That doesn't mean any of that's going to be easy. And I know that the two of you know that and understand. I think speed will be important. I think just the change in personnel. So we have folks like us with 30 years institutional knowledge that will be exiting the system. And how do we prepare that next group of leaders that are our middle managers now who don't have that extra 10 to 20 years that we have from the trenches? And so that preparation starts right now, thinking 5 years ahead for when they're beside us.